Snow crunched under the hooves of the royal party's horses as they rode into the courtyard of Winterfell. Stark men in thick gray cloaks lined the walls in silent, courteous observation. The northern cold had begun to settle into the marrow of even the hardiest of King Robert's retinue, and breath curled in pale wisps from both man and mount. The king wore a heavy bear fur cloak, and though he was grand in both size and presence, a subtle discomfort tugged at the corners of his mouth from the biting chill he had long been unaccustomed to. The sun was low on the horizon, turning the sky over the castle battlements to a dim palette of pink and gray, hinting at the early hour of the day. Lord Eddard Stark stood by to greet his old friend, accompanied by Lady Catelyn, their children, and the household of Winterfell. Ned's face was solemn but warm, with a haunted kindness that had only deepened over the years. The king dismounted with a grunt, dark hair flecked with a few stray strands of gray, and pulled Ned into an embrace hard enough to buckle the Northman's knees. "It's been too long, Ned," Robert boomed. "I don't know how you Northerners do it. If I stay here too long, I might just freeze solid." He released Ned and looked around with genuine wonder and faint unease at the vast expanse of snow-covered stone. Ned smiled in that understated way which Robert knew well. "Winterfell has always kept us warm, Your Grace." Robert scoffed, but gently. "If you say so, old friend, and you must call me Robert, else I'll have you clapped in irons." The corners of Ned's lips lifted. "As you command, Robert." When Ned shifted, Robert noticed Sansa, Arya, Bran, and little Rickon standing beside their mother. Sansa curtsied, Arya made a quick, almost absent-minded attempt, Bran bowed stiffly, and Rickon hid behind Catelyn's skirts. King Robert's thick brow arched with amusement as he greeted each child, teasing Arya and Bran with fatherly comments. With formalities and courtesies exchanged, the entire party proceeded into Winterfell's great hall to escape the cold and break their fast. It was supposed to be a joyous time. The king had come north to make Ned his new hand, filling the vacancy left by the passing of Lord Jon Arryn. Yet as Robert took his seat at the high table and the feasting began, an undercurrent of tension ran through the hall. Courtiers from King's Landing, lords from the north, and the royals themselves were all keenly aware of the significance of this visit. Jon Arryn's death weighed heavily on Robert Baratheon's conscience. Not only had Jon been his mentor and father-in-law, but also his dearest friend after Ned. That shadow only deepened once Lord Tywin Lannister's daughter, the queen herself, swept into the hall. Cersei wore an emerald gown trimmed with gold, and her pale features were a mask of polite contentment. Near her stood her brothers, the tall and famously handsome Ser Jaime Lannister, clad in golden armor beneath a cloak of silk, and the dwarf Tyrion, whose mismatched eyes studied everything with wry interest. Occasionally, Tyrion raised a goblet to his lips and surveyed the hall with no trace of shyness, while Jaime exuded confidence like a lion surveying new territory. The king wasted little time in making his intention clear to Ned. He wanted Eddard Stark to come to King's Landing as his hand. A hush swept the hall as Robert made the public announcement, and though Ned bowed his head in loyal acceptance, an uneasy feeling settled in his heart. He had not wished for honors or offices. He had wanted only his quiet life in the north. Yet loyalty to Robert came first. Too many old debts and friendships bound them together. Not many took notice that, near one of the great hall's imposing columns, sat Peter Baelish Littlefinger. He observed the entire scene with an inscrutable smile. A minor lord by birth, but made master of coin by the king's favor, Baelish's cunning had seen him ascend the ranks of power with startling agility. The tension between him and Ned Stark was not overt, but it was present, swirling beneath the surface, rooted in old wounds and jibes. Littlefinger had practically grown up in the Vale under the watchful eye of House Tully, Catelyn's family, and he had never forgotten the humiliations or heartbreak of his youth. But that day, he was content to remain silent and watchful, swirling the wine in his cup and letting the color of it reflect in his cunning gray-green eyes. Beyond the feast's merriment, clandestine glances were exchanged. Quiet conversations took place in corners and behind raised goblets. But as dawn gave way to midday and the winter sun traveled across Winterfell's courtyard, It seemed for a while as if this gathering might pass without any unpleasant revelations. The plan was that Robert and his retinue would remain at Winterfell for at least a fortnight, giving the king a chance to hunt, to eat, to drink, to laugh, and to reacquaint himself with his old friend. Surely, no one anticipated that, hidden in the labyrinth of secrets swirling in the king's court, a rumor, nay, a shred of truth would be revealed, one that would change the shape of the entire realm. The tall, ancient trees of the Winterfell gods would surround Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon, and an unlikely companion, Ser Jaime Lannister. The white weirwood at the center oversaw them with blood-red leaves, a silent witness to the world's burdens and the unspoken prayers that weighed down 1,000 hearts. Ned had led Robert there to talk in private, away from the ears of Queen Cersei, her ladies, and the assorted courtiers. The king wanted to walk amidst the foreign hush of the northern godswood, though he could hardly hide his discomfort at its otherworldly silence. Eddard was used to it. Jaime, sporting a cloak trimmed with Lannister gold, seemed more amused than anything else, as if this were just another backdrop for a potential, grand spectacle. "What is it you want to tell me, Ned?" Robert asked, breath coming in thick puffs, as the soft crunch of snow underscored each step. Ned didn't answer immediately. He had come to suspect something vile about Jon Arryn's death, even before the king's arrival. The letter from Lisa Arryn, the abruptness of Jon's illness, it did not sit right. Perhaps Ned had wanted to keep this to himself, but there was a creeping sense that the king needed to hear it now. Jaime's presence complicated matters. Why was the Kingslayer here, intruding upon what should have been a private conversation between the king and the Warden of the North? Robert seemed to have brought him along half by accident, or perhaps with the notion that Jaime, of all men, had once considered Jon Arryn a father figure as well, having squired under Lord Sumner Craighall but spent a good deal of time in the Red Keep while Jon was hand. Or, more cynically, perhaps Robert simply enjoyed having Jaime around for the comfort of a recognized warrior at his back. Ned exhaled slowly. "I have reason to suspect Jon Arryn was murdered." Robert's face went blank. Murdered? By whom? His voice was a deep rumble, but there was alarm in it, too. Ned shook his head. "I cannot say for certain. Lisa Arryn sent a letter to Catelyn, accusing the Lannisters of being responsible. Yet the accusations are unclear. I have found no concrete proof." Jaime Lannister's posture stiffened. His handsome face, half-guarded, half-proud, showed annoyance. "Easy enough to blame the Lannisters for anything in King's Landing these days," he said, a hint of scorn lacing his otherwise smooth voice. "But if you have no proof, perhaps it is better left alone." Robert turned to the Kingslayer, annoyance flitting across his face. "If it comes to matters of murder, it will not be left alone, Lannister." Then he regarded Ned once more. "I want the truth," he growled. "Someone took Jon from us, Ned, and by the gods, I'll have their head. That's why I need you with me in King's Landing. You're the only man I trust." Ned glanced down at the snow-laden ground. He felt a rush of conflicting feelings. A sense of loyalty, the weight of duty, and fear for what might lie ahead. "Then we must tread carefully." Jaime seemed surprisingly thoughtful. "If I may, my lord, there were rumors near the end of Jon Arryn's life that he was investigating something quite personal to the crown. Something to do with the lineage of... Well, you'll forgive me, but it concerned matters of the royal bloodline." He paused, and both Ned and Robert stared at him. The king's face flickered with confusion, perhaps with a vague memory of a conversation with Jon Arryn just before he fell ill. Ned, too, recalled that the previous hand had been reading old records in the royal library, looking into the genealogies of great houses. But no one had discovered precisely why. Robert pursed his lips. "Jon never told me what he was searching for." Jaime looked from the king to Ned. "Whatever it was, it got him killed," he surmised, voice low, though he was trying to appear casual. "I'm not saying my sister or father had a hand in it," and there his tone cooled. "But someone must have." Before more could be said, a voice interrupted. Varys the spider emerged from behind a cluster of trees, clad in furs that seemed 2 sizes too large for his round body. Snow dusted the tips of his soft slippers. How he had snuck into the godswood undetected, none of them could fathom. With a courteous bow, he apologized for intruding, yet made no apology for eavesdropping. His face carried a mix of mild apprehension and calculated cunning. "Your Grace, Lord Stark, Ser Jaime, I fear I come bearing news that cannot wait." Robert's eyes narrowed. "What is it now, Varys?" Varys's expression was somber. "A rumor has come to my little birds. It concerns the late Lord Arryn and another man in the small council." Ned stepped closer, eyes dark. Who would stoop to such dishonor?" Varys bowed his head. "I am told that Peter Baelish, Master of Coin, may have orchestrated Lord Arryn's demise. He was quite close to Lysa Arryn, as you know. Or at least she once believed him a friend. The rumor suggests that it was Baelish who manipulated events, who used Lysa's fear of House Lannister to mislead her, that he might further his own aims." Robert's anger flared like a sudden storm. "Baelish? That sly weasel. But why in the name of the Seven would he do such a thing?" He looked both baffled and outraged. "Jon Arryn was a father to me. He was good and decent. He was—" The words choked in his throat. Ned felt a cold dread settle around his heart. The letter from Lysa had pointed to the Lannisters, but if Baelish himself had twisted her mind and penned the letter under false pretenses, or coerced Lysa to do so, it would explain her hasty flight from King's Landing and her paranoia. It would also explain the lack of any real evidence against the Lannisters. But for what end? Jaime Lannister, ironically, looked both enraged and oddly relieved. "If it's true, the blame that's been thrust upon us these past weeks was all a ruse to sow discord among the great houses," he said, his handsome features twisting in disgust. "That cunning fool. I always disliked his coin-counting airs." Ned let out a heavy breath. "I had my suspicions, but never did I imagine that Baelish." He shook his head. "We'll need proof. We cannot confront him without proof, or else we risk giving him cause to flee and hide or strike back from the shadows." Robert's thick fingers curled into fists. "Proof or no proof, I won't stand for this. Jon was like a second father to me. By the gods, if Baelish has done this, if he's murdered Jon Arryn, he'll pay with his life." Jaime's jaw set. "If these are lies by your little birds, Varys, you understand what will happen to you," he said, quietly threatening. Varys bowed gracefully, fluttering his gloved hands. "I only relay what I hear, my lords. The truth is not always a straight line, especially in King's Landing. But I believe this rumor is credible." His eyes flicked from Jaime to Ned to Robert. "I trust you will verify it discreetly, for if Baelish suspects you know, it could have grave consequences." The king's face was a thundercloud. "Yes, yes," he muttered. "Ned, we shall handle this matter together. When we return to the castle, we'll have a word with Baelish. Quietly at first." Ned's nod was grim. He could scarcely believe such a monstrous possibility, yet Baelish's cunning was no secret to him. He felt a prickle of shame at having once accepted Peter Baelish into his castle, even if only as a grudging courtesy to his wife's old friend. "Jaime," Robert snapped, "you speak no word of this to Cersei or your father. The last thing I need is Tywin Lannister interfering before we know what's real." Jaime bowed slightly, though his expression showed a flicker of offense at being given commands that might implicate his family. "As you wish, your grace." With that, the king turned on his heel and stormed back toward the exit of the godswood, Varys at his side. Ned and Jaime followed, each man lost in his own brewing anxieties. The crisp air felt sharper, as if the old gods themselves were unsettled by the revelation. A seething tide of suspicion, anger, and disbelief rippled through them, but it was only the beginning of what would soon tear the fragile peace to pieces. That evening, Winterfell's great tower was lit with torches, chasing away the dark shadows that crept through its corridors. A hush had fallen over much of the castle, as the king's traveling party settled in for their first proper night's rest since leaving King's Landing. Soft music and muted conversation drifted from the smaller halls, where some lesser lords and knights continued to share stories and mead. But in a private solar near the top of the tower, a very different discussion was about to take place. King Robert Baratheon had summoned Petyr Baelish under the pretense of discussing the crown's finances with the new hand-to-be, Eddard Stark. Seated at a table strewn with ledgers, accounts, and half-empty flagons of ale, the king waited for Baelish to arrive. Ned stood behind Robert's chair, arms folded, while Jaime Lannister leaned casually against the wall. Why Jaime? Ned had questioned Robert on that point, and Robert had simply said he wanted Jaime present to represent the royal guard. It was not untrue. Jaime was indeed a member of the Kingsguard, but there were more experienced knights who might have been chosen. Perhaps Robert was testing Jaime's loyalty or ensuring a Lannister witness if Petyr Baelish was indeed implicated. Or perhaps Robert sensed that Jaime's presence would unsettle the Master of Coin, who was not quite fond of the Lion's famed swordsman. When the door opened, Baelish entered with his signature air of self-assurance. A swirl of smoke from a nearby brazier curled around him as he closed the door, blinking in mild surprise at the king's compendium. Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jaime Lannister together in such a small space. "Your Grace," Petyr said smoothly, offering a courteous bow. "Lord Stark, Ser Jaime, might I be of service this evening? Is there an urgent matter regarding the treasury?" Robert's grin was wolfish, entirely humorless. He tapped his thick fingers upon the table. "Baelish, I have a question or two concerning our late hand, Jon Arryn. You served alongside him, did you not?" Baelish's thin mustache twitched. His tone remained even. "I did indeed. Lord Arryn was a good man. It was a great loss for the realm to lose him so suddenly." Ned glanced at Robert, waiting for the king to speak, but the king seemed to be struggling against his anger. Jaime's green eyes slid between them all, watchful, so Ned took the initiative, stepping forward. "Lord Baelish," Ned said carefully, "have you any idea who might have wished Lord Arryn harm? He died quite abruptly, and rumors swirl that it was not a natural passing." Baelish smiled with polite sadness. "I am not the sort to indulge in rumor, my lord. If you recall, even the maesters agreed it seemed to be a fever of some sort. These things can strike even the healthiest among us. Of course, I will not deny that I have heard suggestions that his death was suspicious. My heart goes out to Lady Lisa, who was left so distraught. She was so distraught," Robert said in a low voice, "that she fled King's Landing in the night without a word." Baelish nodded sympathetically. "Grief does many things to the mind, your grace." "That's interesting," Jaime interjected. "Didn't she claim House Lannister was behind Lord Arryn's death?" Baelish shrugged as if the matter was trifling. "Yes, so I was told. Her letter to the Starks indeed made that accusation. Baseless, of course." Robert's voice rose slightly. "Baseless indeed. So, why do you think she wrote it?" Petyr's eyes flicked to Ned. For a moment, it seemed as if he might cast subtle blame on Catelyn's sister for being hysterical. But instead, he demurred. Perhaps she was frightened, unsure. She was so very close to her sister, Lady Catelyn, after all. "I am certain she felt compelled to warn her family." Jaime gave a thin, humorless smile. "Some would say that letter nearly drove a wedge between the Starks and the Lannisters, stirring dangerous tensions in the realm." Baelish's smile did not fade, but it looked more forced. "Such tensions were there long before, Ser Jaime. But I prefer to think the best of Lady Lisa's intentions, misguided though they may have been." Ned's patience waned. "There are rumors, Lord Baelish, that it was you who orchestrated Jon Arryn's death and compelled Lisa to write that letter, implicating the Lannisters." He spoke plainly in the northern way. "What do you say to that?" An icy flicker passed through Petyr's eyes before he let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Me? Kill Lord Arryn? Whatever for? I was raised in the Vale, in many ways under the tutelage of House Tully and House Arryn. Lord Arryn was an honorable man, a friend even. Why would I do such a heinous thing, especially when I stand to gain nothing?" Robert's face turned dark. "Some might say you gained a great deal. Control over the finances of the crown, favor at court, and the chance to pit the Starks and Lannisters against one another, leaving you with more influence than either. Is that not so?" Baelish lifted a hand to his chest, feigning wounded pride. Your Grace, I am your loyal master of coin, a position granted to me by Lord Arryn himself after I proved my talents. I do not see how any personal power I may have is worth the risk of incurring your wrath by murdering the hand of the king. Ned's mind was churning, searching for a clear path to the truth. You had close dealings with Lady Lisa, did you not? In the months before Jon's death, there were accounts of you visiting her in private often. Did you speak of anything unusual? At that, Baelish's expression took on a sly edge. I visited her to offer comfort, as I would any friend. Jon Arryn was consumed with some secret investigation, you see. He neglected his wife. It was only natural that I should be a supportive presence in Lady Lisa's time of need. Jaime snorted in disbelief. How gallant of you! Peter's lips curved in a faint smirk. Some might call it gallant, yes. Lady Lisa was always quite appreciative. She can be a bit impulsive, though, especially when distressed. Perhaps she conjured her own illusions about who killed her husband. Tension thickened the air. Ned could feel the anger in Robert like a storm about to break. The king had always been more comfortable with direct conflict, swords and warhammers, not intangible webs of